Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Expats Exposed podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, I have a podcast called Expats Exposed, where you can find in major podcast streaming platforms. And there I also have episodes where I talk to other expats. I share more about my experiences living abroad, and I don't post all the episodes here on YouTube. So if you want to see more of those episodes, more than 35, I think for now, go to Expats Exposed. Now, have you ever had problems with language living abroad, even when you travel to a different country and you use the basic thank you, hello, that you learned just before you hopped on that plane? I have, having lived in Brazil, Colombia, and China, and traveling to more than 30 countries. I've had problems with language barriers. I've tried sometimes to use the English, but other times that was not even possible. There were times in China that I couldn't read the menu. So these issues that we have when we go abroad, especially when we're living abroad and we're still starting to learn the language, that new language, or even trying to speak English, but there are some countries like China, for example, where the vast majority of the population doesn't speak English well, then you got problems. So today I'm going to talk about this topic, and I'm also going to listen to two friends who lived abroad, sharing their experiences with language barriers. So language barriers, they're very tricky, but they can also be very funny at times. When you ask for chicken and they give you beef, or when you ask for no, I'm a vegetarian, and they still give you some meat. These are problems that we face living abroad, or even going to the drugstore to get the right medication for you. These are problems that we face living abroad or just traveling abroad. So I'd like to start by saying, first of all, in China, which was definitely the biggest challenge I've ever had in my life, living there for nearly 5 years. It was very hard at times, especially in the first year and a half, 2 years, because I got to China and I knew zero. I knew nothing Mandarin Chinese. And there I had a teacher. So I was working at an English school, so they hired a teacher to teach the foreigners Mandarin. And the tricky thing is that China, it's like you cannot read because they're in characters, and you cannot pronounce the characters. So even if you can see a menu, which is all in Chinese Mandarin, you cannot even read that. So at the beginning, we used a lot of apps, like even Google Translator. You can scan and translate the apps, but it was very hard, even like to communicate, even like to say. Of course, I learned hello, bye, how much is this? These thank you, these basic phrases at the beginning, but it was really hard when you wanted to like even go out and like have a meal in a simple restaurant, not McDonald's, but like in a local restaurant. Sorry, there it was a bit hard. And even though these stories can usually be very funny, when you're miming, you're using hand gestures. Even though they can be funny, they can also put you into a very risky situation. And I'll give you my personal example. I am allergic to seafood. And anytime I go to a place, like I don't know the menu, for instance, it's not in English or in Portuguese or Spanish, I try to say the sentence, write it on Google Translator, and that's what I did in my first 6 months, my first year in China. I made sure there was no seafood in my food, because that's very, very, very dangerous for me if I eat seafood, shellfish to be more specific. So I remember that was one of the first things I learned. Like day one in China, I learned how to say 我不能吃海鲜. 我不能吃海鲜. Of course, my pronunciation is terrible, but they did understand. And then they would reply 没有海鲜. I was like, cool. 可以, 可以. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, and then I would go and order the food. But that is something very serious. So if there's something like that, like I had friends in China who were Muslim, and they said like we cannot eat pork, and that's something that you got to learn day one. So also it helps to have an app like even Google Translator and show it to them. They were very helpful. and they really got it when I said it the first times, and nothing ever happened to me. But I also try to avoid. For instance, I like fish. I can eat fish, but I also try to avoid like soup with fish, like fish soup. I was like, no, maybe there's something in that sauce. There could be some shrimp or other shellfish. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So it could be risky. Another thing in China is like numbers. So obviously when you go to the supermarket and you see the prices there and you pay for it and you see it on the screen, that's super easy. You just swipe your card, pay, buy. It's easy. But in China, it's very common, like people selling, street food, street markets, and they will not even have the price. So you ask how much it was and stuff. But something very important is the numbers in Chinese. They only use one hand, and sometimes usually they would tell you how much it was using their hands. So in Chinese, it's like this with the hands: 1、2、3、4、5、6. Damn, I forgot. 7、8、9、10, or just sh, number 10. Learning this was so important at the beginning because they would say it so fast, the numbers. 多少钱? How much is it? 60, 6块. And we were like, what? So it's also very important. And these are things that you're probably going to learn when you get to the place. But using hand gestures are also very important if that's what they also do. And sometimes it can be funny. I remember one time I had like intermediate level French back in the day, 15 years ago. And then there was this French guy who came. He was a friend of a friend. He came over to visit. He came to Brazil, and we were in a club, and the music was super loud. And he was telling something to my friend who spoke perfect French, and I was just like listening to it. I could understand the gist, but I didn't get the joke, and they all started laughing. I was like, ha, 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 yeah. And then my other friend who doesn't speak French was like, what happened? What did they say? I was like, I don't know, but you gotta laugh because it's a club, you're part of it, and it's hard, and we don't realize, because when we are studying a language and it's like, listen to page 10, exercise 1, and everything is quiet, you're 100% focused on the listening. Well, go listen to someone who's speaking French from Switzerland, in a club with loud music, and that's C2 level, So yeah, there are moments that can be funny like this. So I also decided to invite 2 friends to share their views and share their experiences with language barriers. I'm gonna listen to them now with you, and I'm gonna react to that, and I'm also gonna share later more stories that I have of my personal experience dealing with language barriers. So the first person we're going to listen to is Art. Art, or Artur, is from Brazil. He is a digital nomad. He has lived in many different countries, and today he's going to share his experience with language barriers. So let's listen to Art.
Because I'm a native English speaker and Portuguese speaker, and I also know my way around Spanish pretty well, I actually haven't been in many situations where I couldn't really express myself. Of course, there have been a couple of exceptions. One of them was Tunisia, where not everyone speaks English. They mainly speak Arabic and French, and I don't speak any of those languages, but luckily I was traveling with someone who did speak a little French, so I left most of the conversation to her. And but probably the biggest language barrier situation that I've been in was when I spent 1 year living in China, and I was not living in it was a big city, but not a big city center. I was kind of very far away from the city center, so 0 people spoke English. So the only way to communicate was either by using Google Translate or taking screenshots and trying to translate those. Sometimes I would have to go downstairs and give my cell phone to a random person on the street so that the food delivery driver could contact me and find me somehow. So the moral of the story is there's always a way to express yourself and get your message across. but that's not without its challenges, especially when you have no idea of what a language is like, which was my case in China. But learning some of the local phrases and basic sentences and numbers and things like that can also be really useful, which is what I tried to do in China.
So yeah, I forgot to mention that Art is actually native speaker in both Portuguese and English, and as he said, he can speak Spanish, sorry, so he can get by. But he mentioned Tunisia, where they speak Arabic or French. He had someone traveling with him, so she helped him. But if he also mentioned China, living 1 year in China, and I can totally relate to that because I lived 1 year in a very big city, not Beijing or Shanghai, but a city called Qingdao, which has around 8 million people, 9, I think. And there, yeah, some people did speak English. So it was not that hard. That was my first year. But then I moved to these two smaller cities, and barely anyone could speak English. Like I'd say, yeah, my students could, and the other teachers from the school who were Chinese but could speak English, but most of the people couldn't. And that's what I did at the beginning. I would take pictures of the food. I would use Google Translate. I would, and that's how you get by. And then as I also mentioned, like the hand gestures or miming, or don't worry about, oh, it's funny. The Chinese are so helpful at the beginning. They know, like most foreigners, when they get there, they don't speak the language. So they were extremely helpful, and that was really nice. But I like what Art said, like if you, like he speaks like I do, like he speaks English, Portuguese, and Spanish very well. So if I travel all over Latin America, North America, in general, yeah, there's no problem with that. But then when you get to countries like where they have the writings on maybe Arabic, Chinese, and Japanese and other languages, it could get really, really difficult. But I'd say that, as he said, like the moral is like, yeah, there's always a way out. I agree with him. And because he has traveled and lived in so many countries as a digital nomad, I'm sure it's not that difficult for him as well, because we know, and he also works with language teaching, so we know how to communicate, and we'll sort it out. But yeah, don't be afraid. But I also would add to that, like as soon as you get to a place, try to not adapt only, but like notice, pay attention, be aware of your surroundings and how people react, how people use their like vocabulary, or what words they're using, or their correct intonation. Intonation is a big thing when it comes to, like, I mean, many languages, but I'm saying specifically Chinese Mandarin, because they have their tones. And so, yeah, pay attention to when they say thank you, like 谢谢, 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 谢谢. Like, pay attention to the tones and try to repeat that, do the same. Because, again, this is not what we're going to learn in course books, the way that because depending on the region, it's different. But that's something that it's going to help us if you start noticing your surroundings as soon as you get there. I have a story to tell about Spanish, because I've mentioned a lot about China, but here in Colombia, like I came here with a, I don't know, low intermediate, maybe a pre-intermediate level of Spanish 4 years and a half ago. And I had some classes before coming. I could improve. Now I can speak Spanish pretty well. But I remember at the beginning here that they used some words, some expressions that I never learned in course books or anywhere. For example, in Colombia, they call besi, like vecino or neighbor, when they greet people on the street. So you go into a shop and they say, hi Bessie, like, which at first I was like, wow. But it's actually really nice, because you feel like, you know the person, even though you've never seen this person. Another thing they say is for cool, especially in Medellin, but also all over Colombia, they say que chimba or que rico, or que, that's for cool. And you start using that as well. And one of the main differences was when I got to a shop here and I would ask for a latte, instead of saying, for instance, I would like a latte, I'd like a latte or something. The Colombians which would be in Spanish "me gustaría un latte" or something like that. Colombians would say "regálame," which is like gift me, something like that, a latte, and they say that a lot here, and I didn't know that till I got here. So, which is different when you go, for instance, to Spain. And I was like, regálame, and I was like, oh no, it's not regálame here. It's hola, un latte por favor, or me gustaría un latte, and stuff like that. But here's the thing. I mentioned Spanish because, as I said, I can speak Spanish well, I can understand Spanish well, but I know that I got to this level of Spanish because I've been able to notice other accents, other expressions used in different countries, and even the intonation they use, the slang they use. And how did I do that? Yeah, I've traveled to a few Spanish-speaking countries, but I've never been to Mexico, for example. I'm going to go next month. I've never been there, but I've watched on Netflix series and movies from Mexico, series and movies from Spain, Argentina, Colombia, Chile. And then with those movies and series, and then I watched them with subtitles and not subtitles, closed captions, and then I'm listening and reading at the same time Spanish. That helped me a lot, to see the differences in accents. So when I go, last time I was in Spain, it was not difficult at all because I was used to their accent as well. Argentina, I've been there 5 times. Buenos Aires, it's very easy for me. But I'm going to Mexico now, and I actually want to see what it's going to be like. I'm not saying I know the Mexicans. I know Mexicans are super friendly and nice, and they're going to be very nice. I can speak Spanish, I know, but sometimes they perhaps are going to speak too fast. I'm not going to understand a word or another. So it's going to be interesting to see how things go there. Also, another thing about Spanish, my perspective is like I always try to challenge myself. It's not because I live in Colombia, in Bogota, in the Rolo accent or accent from Bogota, which is different from the accent from the coast, from Medellin, the Paisa accent. I've been to these regions and I've had difficulties understanding people speaking in smaller towns in Colombia, or people speaking Spanish to me in Barranquilla, for example. But that's it. You're always challenging yourself, testing yourself, and trying to listen to songs that are from different regions, watching series or movies. But here in Colombia, I'd say that my C2, or my advanced level of Spanish experience, were 2 actually. One was just having a beer with Colombians, with locals, and trying to understand their jokes. Sometimes I wouldn't understand because of the pace they speak. There's background music in a bar. I don't understand some of the expressions they use. So that was one of my advanced level experiences. And the other one was going to a play in a theater, watching a play. That was so difficult because obviously there's no subtitles, there are no closed captions, and then you see people laughing around you, or they're reacting to something and you don't understand. So I'd say that my first time watching a play here in Colombia, I think I understood 50% of what they were saying. Second time, similar, and then the fourth time maybe I understood about 60-70%, but it's still my biggest challenge. I still try to go, if I don't understand something, when I leave the play, I talk to my friend, we discuss what they were saying, this scene or that scene. But this is the one thing that I tell you, especially as a teacher. I'd say challenge yourself. You're not going to understand 100% of a play the first time you go there. You're not going to understand 100% of the jokes and the conversation when you go out with Colombian friends or with locals, wherever you are. But if you have at least a solid, good pre-intermediate level and you want to improve, that's perhaps one of the best ways to improve. It's like authentic language there. So I think that's also a very good point. We're now going to listen to Pavel. Pavel is from Siberia in Russia, but he's moved to South America a few years ago. I think 4 years ago. He's lived in Colombia, Peru. Now he lives in Chile. let's listen to Pavel.
And yes, a big part of surviving language barrier is just learning how to laugh at yourself. Uh, I make a lot of mistakes, all sorts of mistakes, because speaking more than one language and none of them is the local, you confuse a lot of things. And I confuse Spanish and Chinese sometimes even, and I use completely wrong words. Sometimes I use inappropriate language, not knowing that it is inappropriate. That happens. Just don't worry. Know that people are understanding. They understand that you're not the uh, perfect or you don't speak language at all. You making an effort is already enough, but learn how to speak language of people you are surrounded by. It's basic respect.
Yeah, I loved what Pavel said, especially now at the end. Like, learn the local language. That's basic respect. I couldn't agree more with him. It is true because once people understand that you've learned something that you're trying to speak and that you can speak, but maybe you cannot say what you want to say, but they'll be there and they'll help you. That's like in most cases. I know there are countries or cities that might not be like that, but in most cases it is like that. They are going to try and help you. They're going to be interested in trying to make, they'll try to understand you. So I think it's really important that you try and speak the local language. I had an experience in France when I was learning French many years ago. I was in my early 20s and lived in Nice, south of France, in the Côte d'Azur. And I had a good pre-intermediate, perhaps intermediate level, but then I was lost. There was no, at that time there was no phones with Google Maps. So I stopped an old lady in the street and I asked her, how can I get to this place? And she was so patient with me and she explained it and she spoke slowly and I could understand everything. And it's just, these interactions wouldn't be possible if I didn't speak at least a bit of the language. If I were not interested, maybe I wouldn't be meeting random people on the streets or trying to talk to them. Pavel also mentioned laughing at yourself, because sometimes it's just, that's all you can do, like just laugh, and the people are gonna laugh with you, as well. They are, if you I'd say it doesn't change much when I didn't know how to say something in China, or I didn't know how to say something here in Colombia, or I didn't know how to say something in France. People were nice. Of course, some countries are nicer than others, the people in the country. But they would also smile, because smile is international. When you're smiling, when you're laughing, people will be more open to help you. People will understand that you need help with communicating, so they're also going to be nicer to you. That's also my opinion, like Pavel mentioned. And yeah, learn the basics. Like, you're traveling next month to a country like Italy. Let's say you don't speak anything in Italian. At least hello, good morning, or thank you, how much is it? This is basic. Even if you don't know how to say, how to have a conversation and stuff, but this is basic, and I think a bit of respect for the people who live in these countries, and you're actually making an effort to try and speak the language. So I'd say that more than a barrier, like people, like we say, it's a language barrier. More than a barrier, I'd say that it is an opportunity for you to really connect to this new country, city, connect with locals, to be able to have this interaction that perhaps you can do it in English if you speak English, and it's the most known language in the world. So perhaps, of course, like if you can do it in English, great, but also try and learn the local language, because this is very meaningful interaction that you wouldn't have if you just, try to use everything in English or just use your phone or an app, a translating app or something like that. I think it's an opportunity to really get to know the place, the culture, because language is a huge part of culture. And when you learn the language, or when you understand the words, the expressions that they use, and even the different accents within the country, you are also learning a lot about the people, a lot about the culture, and the way that these people they behave, the way that they treat others, foreigners, locals. I think it's a great opportunity. If you have had any experiences traveling abroad, living abroad, with different accents, languages, please let me know in the comments below. If you're watching this on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast streaming platforms, don't forget to give me 5 stars for this episode. Subscribe, follow the channel, the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, same thing. Subscribe to the channel. Please like this video, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening.